Okay, guys, I don't know who's all joining. So just give me a second as I get things together. Make sure I turn that off. I'm going to grab a couple of things here for us. Welcome everybody who's joined us. I'm going to talk a little bit about solo travel here today. So April isn't able to join us tonight. She may join us in the midst. She had another appointment to join before she could get here. So just bear with us as I get things going. And then we'll just jump right in and start talking, solo travel and what that means. I have 5 tips to share with you tonight on things you can think about when you're planning your first solo trip. So I'm just going to jump over here so I can see if anybody's, hey, Katie, Nancy, hi there, if anybody's watching for a bit. And so I want to share 5 tips for solo travel, just a few things that I've learned when I've been traveling. I'm going to pull up my list and then I'll walk you through the things that I suggested. And if you have questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the chat and I will try to keep that screen also up so I can pay attention. So my first suggestion that I give folks when they're thinking about planning their first local trip or their first solo trip is to start local. There's the word. Checking out your own local places. If you're not comfortable really like walking around your own neighborhood, going to dinner alone, if you haven't tried some of those things by yourself, you may find, traveling alone is intimidating. So there's nothing wrong with practicing there. You don't have to wait till you take a big trip. Do that. If you also know that you're going to be walking in a city and you say live in a more rural area in your community, maybe you go into the city and walk around, just kind of get comfortable, try public transportation, do some things in your own area sort of to build that confidence of wandering the streets or walking around by yourself. Don't be intimidated by that. And I do believe that just going and sitting in a coffee shop or walking down the street a bit by yourself, if these are things you don't currently do, then when you do this, when you're traveling, it won't feel as foreign. So that's the first tip I have is don't be afraid to start being alone before you travel. That's the first thing. I'm going to switch over so I can see our chat. The next thing I'm going to suggest is that you get social. I know one of the comments in April, and I just talked about this a couple of days ago, that folks who travel have never traveled alone, and sometimes on their first trip alone, they're thinking that they have to be alone the entire trip, it's some sort of badge of honor to travel alone and spend the entire 5 days or whatever it is totally by yourself. That's not what solo travel means. I think solo travel means a lot of things to a lot of different people. The more you go, the more I think time you'll spend by yourself. Personally, I found that I need a little bit of ebb and flow for my trip. It's nice to spend time with people, and then I need some downtime to rejuvenate and kind of reconnect with myself and then go back out to see people. So if I'm out for, let's say, more than 5 or 6 days, if I travel for 10 or 15 days, I like to have a few days with the community, with people, and then a few days where I'm totally by myself, and then a few days with people, like to kind of go back and forth. But that's me. That's not how everybody is. You can consider a solo trip something where you joined a group, but you didn't know anybody when you started. That I could qualify as solo as well, because you didn't pick a partner and go with that person. You were able to take the freedom to choose where you wanted to go. But there's some other tips about getting social you can do. One is Meetup. Several of you that are listening tonight probably found this through Meetup. We've done that. But Meetup is a great resource even when you're traveling. I look up meetups when I travel in stateside, and in Europe, it's pretty common. People might have like a wine tasting or a dinner or a movie night out. And this is a great way to meet locals, and you don't have to commit to a whole, 3 days with this group of people. You can just have a dinner with them and meet people. There's lots of other ways to meet people, like tours by locals and free tours on foot is another like short little way to get together with a group of people. So looking for small group or half day tours. So maybe most of the day or most of the trip is by yourself, but every couple of days you're going to take a group organized tour. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't need to hide up in your room and spend every meal by yourself. Certainly don't want to do that. I know I found when I've traveled alone that eating alone at a restaurant or walking the city or even sitting in the park by myself, being alone invites people to come talk to me. So truthfully, I meet and interact with more people when I travel alone than I do when I travel with someone else. If I travel with another person, I often spend much of that time with that person or with that group of people. But if I travel alone, I'm more likely to somebody to walk up and introduce themselves. I feel a little more open. So I meet more locals and more travelers. And then speaking of that, I think that I know we've talked about, April and I've talked a few times about staying in hostels versus hotels versus Airbnbs. And I love hostels. Again, I can only take them for so many days at a time. Hostels are full of people, lots of time younger people than me, but it's full of people. There's lots of travelers. You're meeting not locals, but typically travelers, but lots of times travelers from all over the country. So I like to mix it up, right? Spend a few days in an Airbnb where it's just me, or a hotel, or with friends where I'm just with a couple of people, and then maybe spend a couple of days in a hostel where I'm, bombarded with lots of people interacting with other humans. That actually would be, if I were to choose it, I'd do the other way. I'd go to the hostel first. And I'd go to the hostel first because I meet other travelers that I might connect with to do a day trip tomorrow or in a couple of days. And I'll get ideas for the things that they're doing. So there's a lot of conversation because they're all traveling too. So you get ideas that you hadn't thought about or neighborhoods you hadn't thought to visit. So hostels are a great way to connect with people without having to be on a tour. A lot of hostels will have private rooms. So if you're not comfortable in the bunk room, you can still get a private room. You might have to share a restroom, a bathroom, but even some of the hostels have private rooms and private with in-suite bathrooms. So you can still have that hotel experience, but having the hostel group, like the group living room and kitchen where you can meet other people. So that's another way to kind of get social and connect with other people, both before you go, like on Meetup, looking those places up, but also kind of plan for your trip that you're not needing to be completely isolated the whole time you travel by yourself. And then another tip, the third tip I have is to just enjoy the freedom. By far, it's in the middle of my 5 tips, but it's by far my favorite thing about traveling alone. I can do whatever I want. I can do nothing today. I can sit at home in the hotel and watch Netflix movies if I want to do that. I baked a cake. I did that in Belize, and I had somebody, it was my mom, was like, why are you baking a cake? What are you going to do with that? And I was like, well, I'm going to be here for 6 days. And I made myself dessert for the whole 6 days. And I went down to the market and I found all these cool things. And I like to cook. I made a pineapple upside down cake in Belize with fresh pineapple, and I had a blast. But that's me, not anybody else. I mean, somebody else might not enjoy that. I can go to the library. I can go sit and have coffee. I don't have to do what other people think I should do. Sometimes we feel pressured when we travel with others to kind of keep the pace. And also if you travel with somebody else, it can be hectic because I choose 2 things, you choose 2 things. So now we're doing 4 things during the day. And maybe I just wanted to do 1 thing and then just kind of lounge around or wander the city a little bit. That may not be what the other people want to do. So the freedom of having that and not have to feel judged based on what you do is one of the reasons I really, really love solo travel, that I can pick and choose what I want to do. I think it's kind of selfish, maybe that's what it is, but I really enjoy it. My 4th tip is location, picking where to go. Now, I've traveled solo to a lot of different locations out in the middle of nowhere, as well as in big cities. Again, that's kind of what you feel comfortable with. The couple of things that I would consider if it were my first trip, by myself would be one, like what kind of lodging and what's the ease of movement? Like if I'm going to a country where maybe I don't feel comfortable driving, are there options to get a car, get a taxi, get an Uber, take public transportation? How am I going to get around by myself? And do I feel safe doing those things? If I feel comfortable driving, is that something I want to do? So where I'm staying and how am I going to maneuver? So that's definitely something I consider. If you go with a group or you're with other people, right, there's safety in numbers. You might get to take turns doing the driving or paying attention to those things. All the responsibility of knowing how to use the public transportation may not be all on you. So if it's just you, I look at those two things. I mean, honestly, I look at that when I travel anywhere with other people as well. But it is something that I consider as far as my comfort zone is the lodging and like the ease of moving around and where I want to go. Can you rent a bike? There's lots of different ways to maneuver. And then the other is the language and culture. Now, I haven't really talked about this, but I think one of the things that I do pay attention to, and I would pay attention to if it were my very first solo trip, is how far outside my comfort zone I'm going, right? This is how much you're challenging yourself. If you say have not traveled a ton, you haven't been out of the country, you don't speak a lot of languages, going to a country where you don't speak the language, the currency is different, everything about the culture is different. You already expect to have culture shock, and you haven't spent a lot of time by yourself or traveled by yourself. You're adding like it's double duty, right? You're not only having the culture shock, but you're having the solo shock happening as well. So my other suggestion would be to pick something that's closer to your own language, closer to your own culture. Maybe they speak more English there, so that the only shock that you're having on this trip is, spreading your wings and being on your own. But once you get more experience with the solo travel, you'll find that you can go anywhere. But it just removes that, little bit of risk. So it keeps that comfort zone, whether it's with your language or culture. My first trip was in Belize. And although I didn't choose it for this reason, it turned out to be a great choice for my first solo trip because everybody in Belize speaks English. It was an English colony. And then they all take the US dollar. They have their own currency, but everybody takes the US dollar. It was really easy to purchase things. I didn't have to do crazy math in my head. Communicating with folks was really easy. Whereas when I went to Vietnam later, like that was a little different. Still, a lot of people spoke English in Vietnam. I was surprised by that. But there was, the currency issue. There was a lot of different foods. There was a lot of different culture shock in Vietnam than in Belize. So I was pleased that I chose that as an easier easing into the solo travel, if you will. As we're talking about this, I do want to bring up I'm going to put the link for this, the location. I'm going to put this in the chat. There is this wonderful site. It's a Global Peace Index. And if you look at this website, you can see what every year they rank the safest countries, and they rank them on a number of things. So it's a great way to kind of pick safe countries based on their medical providers, crime. There's a number of things that they rank. So it helps you pick like where in the world is safer. There honestly, for me, is very few, I don't want to say no, there are very few places I don't want to go. There are a few places I won't go because I don't feel it's safe yet. But most of the places is because I've traveled quite a bit, I feel more comfortable going. But the more you travel, the more you feel comfortable venturing out. But if we're talking about that first trip, I would definitely say you can look at that Global Peace Index and see what it is. You're going to see Iceland, number one on that list. It's been, I think, number one 11 or 12 years in a row. Their crime rate in Iceland is really low. I went there in 2018, I think it was. I took a group to Iceland, but I would absolutely feel safe in any place in Iceland. The only safety issue I think there is in Iceland for me was there's so much out in the middle of nowhere locations where it might be difficult to get help or support. So just making sure that I would be within arm's reach of different things and had good cell coverage where I was going. But other than that, as far as the safety of my person, and people helping me, Iceland would be the top of the list. I think Denmark's on that list. I'm gonna go look real quick. Oh, Iceland, New Zealand, Denmark, Portugal. Look at that. Those are the ones you would think too. Not surprising that those are the top ones. So when you're picking your location, you might look at that. There's another website, and I think I'm going to share this too. There's a website that's walkable, and I'm going to find that. It's I used this a few years ago for something else, and I found it's called the Walk Score, and I'll put this in the link as well. It's walkscore.com, and this is a, let's see if it's still there. Oh, it says it's not working. Give me a minute. If I can get it to open, I will get you there. This particular app, and there may, if that one's not working, I may find another one, but it's great to look at the walkability of the neighborhood, because if you're going to be in a city and you don't want to rely totally on public transportation, it's nice to know how walkable it is, and there are some places that will give you that walk score. Okay, I think for solo trip, Katie, in Italy, fantastic, 1990, no internet meant we went to the consulate in New York to gather information. Oh yes, so Katie, I remember, I so remember doing things. I know I mentioned this before. If those of you who are of a certain age remember when you were traveling to a location in the United States, we would travel, you would write ahead to the Chamber of Commerce and they'd send you a stack of papers, and you could write ahead to different countries and they'd send you all this stuff. So there used to be a time where we could go to the consulate, or we could go to different places and gather the information, and you didn't have all this, like, I think it's an overabundance of information on the internet. Like, it's really hard to sift through everything. 1990, that's a long time ago, Katie. I'm glad to hear you've been solo traveling for quite some time. That's fantastic. And Italy is a great choice of a place to go, both because there's food and people are pretty friendly in Italy. I think you would have good luck connecting with different people. And having people like just walk up and introduce themselves, which that's sort of the beauty of travel, right? Is that you get to meet and connect with the different cultures of the world. So what a great idea, a great place to go. I think I want to go to Italy alone as well. I've been to Paris in the last several years. A couple of times I took my mom, and then I took my daughter, then I took my mom. But I am dying to go by myself. I want to go to Paris with no one and just wander the streets and drink coffee and sit in parks and do absolutely nothing. I think it would be the most luxurious trip in the world. And I don't need any plans or any tours, just wander around and talk to people in French. That would just be a perfect trip. So I'm gonna give my last tip, and then we'll just see if there's other questions that you have. And the last tip is sort of like the first tip, which is, taking that start local tip another step further. I would think about things you can practice. Again, one of the most intimidating things about traveling alone is the fact that it's just you, and you feel like you're stretching outside your comfort zone, a little bit of intimidation. So every time you do something, like I said, walking and sitting at a coffee shop alone, every time you do those things, even in your own hometown, it will give you confidence. So that confidence just keeps layering on top of layering. So then when you actually go on your trip, you're going to have that, you get to carry that confidence with you. And that's true about things like public transportation. So if you don't currently do that, and you're planning to do that on your trip, go practice taking the bus in your own city. Now, I know it's not the same because it will be in a different language, and they'll have a different machine, and they'll have a different card. But I promise you, as I've traveled, public transportation, trains and buses pretty much operate the same from city to city, country to country. The principles are the same. You can use some of that. There's going to be nuances and differences. They're going to be in a different language and a different currency. The card's going to look different. The names of the places are going to be different. But for the most part, how they function is the same. So just doing that on your own will locally will help you. I know when we went to Costa Rica, I had to purchase a SIM card. I needed to have access, so I purchased a SIM card for my phone. Now, I did not wait till I got to Costa Rica to see if the SIM card worked. I got a SIM card stateside, I put it in my phone. I went to the phone store and had to make sure it was working. I did all that ahead of time so that when I got to the airport in Costa Rica, I could just swap it out and there I was ready to go. Just took a little bit of practice. It took a little bit of prep time. There's lots of things you can do like that. I think I mentioned when April and I talked before about wishing I would have gone online when I went to Belize and looked at the airport. One of the beautiful things about the the internet and all the access we have is that you can see things. So you can open up Google Maps and drop the little yellow man and down on the street and walk up and down the street and see what the street looks like that you're going to stay at or that you want to walk on. I do this when I get Airbnbs. I almost always drop that little yellow guy on the map and turn around on the street and go, there's the building. I can see what it looks like from the street. Sometimes I'll screenshot that so I can keep that with me. I know what the door looks like and how the entrance appears from the street level. So I know if I'm walking up or driving up, I can find it. But I wish in Belize, before I went, I would have looked at photos of what the airport looks like. Now I know this sounds silly, but it was my first solo trip, my first international solo trip. And the airport was really tiny. And those of you who are in LA, it's probably smaller than Burbank. Super tiny airport. It is smaller than Burbank. I think it has like one or two terminals and like one place to get your luggage. But it also looks like it just came out of 1952. So I got off the plane outside, walked across, went inside, and I thought I'd like time traveled. And I was a little culture shocked. Like I wasn't sure what to expect. It was different. Everything seemed really weird. Now I have to go through customs in this place. Had I known what I was going to see, literally just known what I was going to see, it probably would have changed how I felt when I arrived there. So just doing any kind of practice or prep that you can do prior to traveling wherever you're going will boost that level of confidence, because there's going to be stuff, right, when we travel that you're not going to know. There's going to be stuff that unexpected things that happen that you can't practice or that you can't learn before you go. But honestly, the more of those like little things, if something's making you anxious or uncomfortable, go research it just a little bit so you can lower that. I know I'll say one more thing is that when we went to Costa Rica, we drove. I took my children and we rented a car. And it was the first time that we had driven across. We drove from one end of Costa Rica to the other. But I did honestly watch probably an hour or more of different videos on YouTube on what the roads were like in Costa Rica, what it was like to drive, what the rules were. Bridges in Costa Rica are crazy, sometimes just two boards across the river. So I wasn't surprised when I saw the things that I saw. It still didn't change the fact that I was petrified going across this narrow little bridge, but I knew that this was normal for this area, having watched those videos and having done that research. So that's my fifth trip. So I'll go back and share again. The first one that I shared at the top was to start local. Just do things by yourself locally if you want to travel by yourself. Don't feel, as I said, get social. So don't feel like you have to do it all alone the entire time. And you might even try doing like a little local trip stateside, like take a weekend and go to some little neighborhood town, someplace that's close by, and just spend the weekend by yourself. It's fun. Enjoy the freedom. Don't forget that you have the freedom to do whatever you want when you're there, including baking a cake if you want to do that. No matter what anybody tells you, you can bake cakes and go shopping, and you can lay around and watch movies in the evening and put your feet up if you're tired and not have to worry you've done 6 or 8 things today. Pick your location that my tips are based on where you stay and the ease of movement around that location. And then also how outside your comfort zone, the language and culture are, identifying where to go. And I dropped that Global Peace Index link in the chat so you can check and see what they're saying are the safest countries in the world, and that changes every year. And then just practice different things. So I'm going to stop. I have a few more minutes and I'm just going to ask, I see people are chatting. April is here. Thanks for joining, April. If anybody has any questions or any additional comments, I see Nancy did Ireland for 3 weeks in 2017. That sounds amazing. I think we talked to you, Nancy, about your trip in Ireland. It was a beautiful trip. Anybody have any other questions or comments about travel? Oh yeah, April, I remember you bringing up the practice pre the flight when you met your dad in Frankfurt. It helps just to like sometimes just see that picture or watch that little video that shows how things work. Makes a huge difference on how comfortable you feel when you arrive. And I mean, these tips that I'm sharing for solo travel, they're not exclusive to that. They would be on any trip you were taking. All these things can help you pick where to go and what to do. So I'm going to just let you go here in a minute, but before I do, I want to give you a link. We've interviewed a couple of folks about different locations, and one of Lindsey here, we interviewed a few months back, probably a year ago now, and she is traveling solo in Mexico, and her trip, she talks here a little bit about where she stayed. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to title it New Mexico. And this is Lindsey and her trip. And check that out because Lindsey's, she talks a little bit about staying at hostels I think in the interview we're having with her, she's in a private room somewhere at a hostel as well. And she talks about how she was choosing those. She was staying long-term in Mexico. I think she'd been there a few months. So you might check that out. And then tonight is Wednesday, and tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, same time that we started here, we will have a new video up. We're going to be interviewing Kathy Dunn. She went to Mexico as well, and she has a great resort where she goes. She travels alone there every year, and she continues to go back year after year. So real excited to hear about Kathy's trip to Mexico. So come back tomorrow at 6 o'clock and watch us again. So I'm going to check one more time. All right. I am all good unless anybody has any questions. All right, folks, everybody have a great evening, and tell us if you're watching this as a recording, folks, don't forget to let us know. I'll put some of these links in the comments or in the description, but also put in the comments your trips and where you went. We would love to hear about your solo trip as well.